No one ever expects disaster to strike in the calm of a Tennessee dusk. The air was heavy with the sweet scent of clover, the sky blushing pink and gold above rolling
Come on
pastures,
now, he won't
and the
bite.
world seemed at peace. Virginia Walsh, Ginny to everyone who knew her, stood on her porch, a mug of coffee cooling in her hand, as the sun slipped behind the distant tree line. At 47, Ginny had come to cherish these quiet evenings, especially since moving back home to the ranch after her divorce, to care for her aging mother and the horses that no one else wanted. She heard it before she saw it. A frantic, uneven thudding coming from the lower field, a sharp whinny cutting the stillness. Ginny's heart leapt. That was Boone, her oldest rescue, a chestnut quarter horse with a scarred flank and eyes that followed her everywhere. He was the soul of the ranch, gentle and wise, a survivor of more than his share of storms. Dropping her mug, Ginny sprinted down the steps, boots thudding across the porch and into the field, her breath coming sharp and fast. She rounded the corner past the barn and stopped dead. There, in the waning light, Boone twisted and bucked, wild-eyed, muscles taut with panic. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and then Ginny saw why. A seething mass of bees, hundreds, maybe thousands, clung to his mane and flanks, swirling around his body in a living storm. Each time Boone stamped or tossed his head, the swarm pulsed tighter, stinging without mercy. Ginny didn't think. She just moved, yelling Boone's name, waving her arms as she ran straight into the heart of the chaos. The bees ignored her at first, focused on their target, but as Ginny reached Boone's side and tried to brush them away, they turned on her. Stings bloomed along her arms and neck, hot and electric. Tears stung her eyes. Boone's knees buckled, he staggered, crashed to the ground, legs thrashing, mouth flecked with foam. No, he couldn't die, not like this, not after everything they'd been through. Ginny dropped to her knees, grabbing handfuls of Boone's mane, swatting bees, shouting for help, though she knew her mother couldn't hear from inside the house. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to save herself, but she couldn't leave him. Blood and sweat and fear mingled on her skin as she yanked her shirt over her head, trying to cover Boone's face, shield his eyes, anything to give him a chance. The bees crawled under the fabric, up her sleeves, under her hair. Ginny gasped for air, dizzy, heart pounding. She fumbled in her pocket. Her phone? No, she'd left it in the house. The world shrank to the fevered, desperate struggle in the grass. Boone's breathing grew ragged, his sides heaving. Ginny pressed her ear to his nostrils. Still there, barely. Please, just breathe. A sudden wild fluttering overhead made Ginny flinch. She looked up to see a flock of barn swallows diving and swooping through the swarm. The birds darted, quick as arrows, snatching bees mid-air, scattering the worst of the cloud. For a split second, hope surged. Ginny seized the moment, grabbing Boone's halter, whispering nonsense, anything to anchor herself to this world. She could see the farmhouse now, a warm glow in the growing dark. "Help!" Ginny's voice cracked. "Mama, help!" But the night swallowed her cry. She tried to drag Boone, but his weight was dead and heavy. The bees thinned, driven off by the birds, but her arms trembled, weak with stings and adrenaline. She patted Boone's neck. "Stay with me, boy. Stay." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind shifted, carrying away the last of the bees. Ginny tore her shirt away, shaking, her skin raw and swelling. Boone's eyes rolled white, his breathing shallow. She pressed her hands to his side, counting 1, 2, 3. Breathe. Come on. She didn't notice the tears streaming down her face, only the pounding in her ears. Footsteps pounded behind her. A flashlight beam danced in the darkness. "Ginny!" It was Clara Burns, her neighbor, voice sharp with fear. "What happened?" Clara dropped to her knees, taking in the scene. The swarm, Boone's collapsed form, Ginny's battered arms. "God, are you all right?" "Call, vet, please." Ginny forced the words out, teeth chattering. He's not breathing. Help me." Clara pulled out her phone with shaking hands, barking orders into the receiver. "Stay with me, Ginny, stay." She knelt, feeling for Boone's pulse, then shoved her jacket over his head, whispering encouragement. Together they worked, two women against the darkness, praying for a miracle. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, as Ginny pressed her forehead to Boone's neck. "You hear me? Don't you leave me. Not now." She couldn't say more. The world narrowed to the sound of Boone's labored breaths and the distant wail of a siren, coming closer. Ginny clung to Boone, her hands sticky with sweat and tears, as the night closed in, waiting to see if hope or heartbreak would claim them first. The siren's wail faded into the wind as the vet's truck turned down the long gravel drive. By then, the storm had broken, fat, hard drops of rain battering the tin roof of the barn and turning the pasture into a quagmire. Ginny and Clara huddled over Boone, their hands shaking, breaths steaming in the chilly air. The world had shrunk to this patch of muddy earth, to the fragile thread of life clinging to the battered horse between them. Dr. Steve Byers was a big man in a battered raincoat, his face lined by decades of hard country practice. He slid from the truck, grabbing his bag, and jogged to where Ginny knelt beside Boone. "How long?" he asked, voice low and urgent. Ginny tried to answer, but her throat felt raw. 20 minutes, maybe more." "Any allergy meds? EpiPen?" Steve asked. Clara shook her head, pulling her soaked hair out of her eyes. "We tried to cool him down. Wet towels, cold packs. He's been stung all over." The vet was already moving, his hands fast and sure, feeling for a pulse, checking Boone's gums. "He's in anaphylactic shock. We're losing him." Steve shot a dose of epinephrine into Boone's neck, then began an IV drip, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. Ginny tried to help, her fingers clumsy, but Steve waved her back. "You, get inside. Look at yourself." "I'm fine," Ginny snapped. "Just save him, please." Lightning cracked across the sky, lighting up Boone's side. Dozens of angry, swollen welts covered his body, some already oozing clear fluid. His eyes were half shut, his breaths shallow and irregular. Ginny pressed her face to his neck, whispering, "I'm right here, boy. You're not alone." Inside the farmhouse, Ginny's mother, Ruth, had seen the lights and come to the back door, clutching her rosary. She was a small, stooped woman with sharp eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw. "Virginia," she called into the dark, her voice nearly lost in the storm. "Come in before you catch your death." Clara ran to grab more towels and an old blanket, while Steve barked orders. "Keep him warm, but not hot. Watch for shock. If he goes down again." Ginny nodded, mind spinning, eyes never leaving Boone. Hours slipped past, the night crawling by in fits and starts. Ginny and Clara worked in shifts, one holding Boone's head, one changing ice packs, one wiping away the sweat and blood from his hide. The storm raged on, wind lashing the barn, rain pounding the tin roof so hard it sounded like applause. Ruth sat on a stool just inside the door, praying in a low, steady voice, her beads clicking quietly in her wrinkled hands. At 1 a.m., Boone's breathing stopped. It happened so fast. 1 second he was shuddering, nostrils flaring. The next, his sides went still. Ginny screamed, "No, no! Boone! Clara, help!" Together, they threw themselves across his chest, rubbing his flanks, massaging his heart, pleading, come back, don't go, not yet." Steve jammed another needle into Boone's vein, cursing under his breath. For an endless moment, nothing happened. Ginny thought she heard Ruth's voice rise, singing softly, a hymn from Ginny's childhood. Then, with a great heave, Boone's chest lifted. He drew in a choking breath, then another. Ginny collapsed against him, shaking. "That's it. Stay, right here, you stubborn old man." Clara handed her a wet rag, wiping sweat from Ginny's brow. "He's a fighter," Clara whispered, "like you." The hours crawled by. Ginny's arms went numb from holding Boone's head off the wet ground, but she refused to let go. The rain beat down. Steve dozed in a folding chair, waking at every cough or movement. Clara made tea on the old propane stove, passing hot cups around, and even Ruth sipped hers, her eyes never leaving her daughter and the dying horse. At 3 a.m., Boone's breathing slowed again. Ginny counted out the seconds, 1, 2, 3, willing his lungs to fill. She stroked his ears, his muzzle, whispering stories of wild pastures and sunny days, of the time Boone had run the length of the ranch to chase off coyotes, of every small victory they'd shared. "I need you," she murmured. "Please, don't go." Once more, Boone's breath stuttered, stopped. This time, Ginny felt a cold dread settle in her chest. Steve leapt to his feet, massaging Boone's chest, muttering, "Come on, come on." Clara and Ginny worked together, cold packs on his head, stroking his flank, until at last Boone drew a shuddering breath and returned. The storm outside seemed to slow. Ruth's prayers grew louder, then softer, her voice a steady background to the struggle inside. Dawn was still hours away. Ginny leaned her head against Boone's side, feeling every shaky breath. "You don't get to leave me tonight. I won't let you." Clara put a hand on Ginny's shoulder. "We're here, all of us. He's not alone." The night dragged on, a test of endurance and hope, of love and faith, as the world shrank to 3 women, a dying horse, and a stubborn thread of life. Ginny's hands ached, her eyes burned, but she held on. Boone fought for every breath, every heartbeat. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, hope flickered, stubborn and bright. Dawn crept over the fields like a promise, painting the world in gray and gold. The storm had spent itself, leaving the land soaked and heavy, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and grass. Ginny blinked against the new light, exhaustion ringing through her body. Every muscle ached, every finger felt thick and clumsy, but she didn't care. Her eyes were locked on Boone. He was alive. Barely, but alive. Boone stood unsteadily on his hooves, sides trembling. The wounds from the bee stings were swollen and raw, pink against the chestnut of his coat. His breathing was shallow but steady, and every few seconds his eyes flickered toward Ginny, glassy but aware. Ginny reached out, brushing his forelock away from his eyes, her hands trembling. "That's it, boy. You're still here," she whispered. "You hear me? Don't you dare give up now." Clara, looking just as battered as Ginny felt, pressed a steaming mug of coffee into her hands. "Drink," Clara said gently. "You need it." Her own hands shook as she cradled her cup, dark smudges beneath her eyes. Ginny nodded and took a sip, the heat scalding her tongue, but grounding her in the moment. Dr. Byers, after a long, silent examination of Boone, finally nodded with a weary kind of hope. "It's a miracle he made it through the night," he said, voice rough with fatigue. "Now it's up to him and you. Watch for infection, fever, or trouble breathing. Keep him warm and calm. Call me if anything changes." Ruth appeared at the barn door, wrapped in a faded shawl, her sharp gaze softened by relief. "Thank the Lord," she whispered, crossing herself. She hobbled forward, pressing her wrinkled hand against Boone's neck, whispering prayers under her breath. The morning settled into a strange, fragile peace. Ginny, Clara, and Ruth moved around Boone in shifts, tending to his wounds with gentle hands and quiet words. They washed away dried blood, dabbed ointment on the worst of the stings, and laid fresh straw in his stall. They checked his temperature and coaxed him to sip water. Every small victory met with cautious relief. For a while, the world shrank to the barn and the battered horse at its center. The usual morning chores, feeding the chickens, mucking stalls, turning the other rescues out to pasture, were forgotten or hurried through. The other horses, sensing the tension, paced along the fence line or stood silently in their stalls, eyes trained on the drama unfolding at the heart of the ranch. By mid-morning, Boone managed a few bites of hay. The sound of him chewing, slow, deliberate, made Ginny's heart swell. She stroked his neck, voice low and steady. "Good boy, that's it, little by little." Each tiny act, Lifting his head, flicking his tail, even just standing upright, felt like a defiance of the darkness that had nearly swallowed him. But as the adrenaline faded, Ginny felt a different weight settle in her chest. She leaned against the stall door, watching Boone breathe, her mind swirling with doubts. Why had she run into the bees, risking herself so recklessly? Why did she pour so much of herself into these animals, creatures most folks saw as disposable, as burdens or tools? Why did it always feel like she was fighting against a world that wanted to break her? Clara sat beside her in the straw, silent for a long time before speaking. "You know," Clara said, "most people would have let him go, would have run for help, called animal control, stayed safe." She looked Ginny in the eye. "But you run into the fire every time." Ginny managed a tired smile. "Maybe I'm just stubborn." Clara shook her head. "No, you care. That's not weakness. It's why these animals have a chance." A heavy silence lingered, broken only by the slow, rhythmic sounds of the barn. Boone's breathing, the shuffle of hooves, the coo of doves roosting in the rafters. Ruth entered quietly, carrying a plate of toast and eggs for Ginny. "Eat," she commanded, her tone gentle but firm. Ginny accepted the plate, her appetite slow to return, but she knew she needed the strength. As she ate, her mother settled beside her, recounting stories from years past, of blizzards that nearly killed the herd, of droughts and floods, and all the hardships they'd survived together. "It's always darkest before the dawn, Virginia," she said. "You have to believe that, even when it hurts." Ginny nodded, the words sinking deep. She looked at Boone, her battered, beautiful friend, and felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Later, Clara offered to take the afternoon shift so Ginny could rest. Ginny hesitated, not wanting to leave Boone, but her mother insisted. "You're no good to him if you fall over," Ruth said. So Ginny stumbled back to the house, peeled off her muddy boots, and collapsed onto her bed, the weight of exhaustion pulling her under. She dreamed of storms and bees and wild open fields, of running alongside Boone through endless grass, sunlight pouring over them both. She awoke with a start, heart pounding, but as she looked out her bedroom window, she saw Boone standing in the morning light, Clara at his side. The sight grounded her. By evening, the ranch began to return to its slow rhythm. Ginny joined Clara and Ruth for dinner, their conversation softer, more hopeful. The fear of the night before lingered, but it was tempered now by the quiet certainty that they had survived something together, something that had changed them all. As the sun set behind the hills, Ginny returned to the barn. Boone lifted his head at her approach, ears flicking forward. Ginny smiled, running her hand along his neck. "We made it through," she murmured, "one step at a time." The darkness no longer felt quite so heavy. In its place, a fragile hope took root, one that would guide them through the long days of healing still to come. The days that followed blended into each other, soft, cautious, and slow, like the gentle rhythm of Boone's breathing. Each sunrise brought a small new hope, and each sunset a measure of relief that the worst had not returned. The rain clouds gave way to high blue skies, and the Tennessee hills glimmered green and washed clean by the storm. Boone's recovery was anything but certain. His body bore the signs of the ordeal, patches of missing hair, swelling along his legs and neck, and raw, angry welts that needed careful tending. Ginny rose with the dawn, her first thoughts always of him. She would slip on her boots, pad quietly through dew-soaked grass, and lean over the stall door, searching his eyes for some sign of the old spark. Sometimes Boone would barely lift his head. Other mornings he greeted her with a soft nicker, the barest flicker of his former spirit. Ginny made sure his water bucket was clean, that the straw was dry, that he had fresh-cut grass and gentle words. She measured out the pain meds and ointment, careful with every step, her hands gentle but strong. Boone accepted her touch without flinching, as if he understood the care behind each gesture. Ruth often joined Ginny in the barn, shuffling to Boone's side, her cane tapping lightly on the floorboards. She'd talk to the horse in a low, steady voice, sometimes reciting lines from old hymns or sharing memories from decades past. "Your daddy once pulled a foal out backwards, middle of a blizzard," Ruth would say, tracing her fingers along Boone's withers. "And you, Virginia, you were just a girl, standing there with a bucket of warm water, eyes big as saucers. We made it through then, too." Those stories lingered in Ginny's mind as she worked. She remembered the long nights of her childhood, listening to the grown-ups worry over weather and money and lost cattle. The way her father's hand had squeezed her shoulder after a hard day. The taste of her mother's biscuits in the dark kitchen, steam curling up as dawn broke. The past felt close now, woven into the walls of the barn, stitched into the very soil beneath her feet. Clara became a near-constant presence at the ranch. She'd arrived every afternoon with supplies, fresh gauze, bags of carrots, sometimes a casserole from her own kitchen. She would help Ginny clean Boone's wounds, change his bandages, or just sit on a bale of hay and keep watch while Ginny ran errands. The two women didn't always speak, but the silence between them felt companionable, heavy with unspoken gratitude. One morning, Ginny found Clara brushing out one of the rescue ponies in the paddock. The old horse leaned into her touch, eyes closed in bliss. Clara looked up, her face framed by the rising sun. "Animals remember kindness," she said, matter of fact, even if they never say it out loud. Ginny smiled, the warmth in Clara's words settling in her chest. "I don't know what I would have done without your help, Clara." Clara shrugged, the corner of her mouth turning up. "You'd have managed. You're stubborn as they come." Their laughter echoed across the field, the tension of the past days slowly easing. As Boone's appetite returned, so did his stubbornness. He snorted at the bitter taste of his medicine, nudged the empty bucket at Ginny's leg when he wanted more water, and once even tried to nibble at her hair while he leaned over to change his bandages. Ginny scolded him, but her voice was soft, full of affection.
It wasn't just Boone's recovery that seemed to change the rhythm of the ranch. Other women from the community, widows, single mothers, old friends who had faced floods or lost animals themselves, began to stop by. Some came with baked goods or fresh eggs, others with stories and quiet company. They talked about the bee swarm, about the miracles and dangers of farm life, about the little things that kept them going. One evening, after Ruth told a story about surviving a tornado as a girl, a woman named Lydia wiped her eyes and said, "We never know how strong we are until something tries to break us." The circle of women nodded, each holding a piece of that truth inside. With this new web of support, Ginny felt herself letting go, just a little, of the isolation that had haunted her since her marriage ended. She found herself asking for help when she needed it, sharing a joke or a memory, or just sitting quietly while someone else took a turn at Boone's side. Every day brought small milestones. Boone ate a little more, then a little more. He took a few shaky steps into the paddock, flinched at a buzzing fly, but didn't panic. Ginny and Clara watched his progress with cautious hope, careful not to expect too much too soon. One afternoon, as the sun set over the hills, Ginny leaned against the fence and watched Boone graze in the fading light. Ruth joined her, their shoulders nearly touching. "I'm proud of you, Virginia," Ruth said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years. "Not just for saving him, but for keeping this place alive, for not giving up." Ginny blinked back tears, letting the words settle. She looked at her mother, at the horses in the field, at the friends who'd gathered around her. For the first time in a long while, she felt not just relief, but a sense of belonging, of hope that might last beyond a single night. The world was still fragile, Boone's recovery far from guaranteed, but in that moment, Ginny believed that maybe, just maybe, they could weather whatever storms still lay ahead. By the end of the week, word had spread across the valley about Boone's ordeal and the late-night struggle in the storm. Some stories were true, others had grown with every telling. Ginny's bravery painted larger, the swarm becoming a biblical plague, the rescue something almost supernatural. The small-town gossip vine never missed a beat, especially when a story included danger, animals, and a hint of defiance. It started with curious neighbors arriving at the ranch gate, their trucks kicking up dust on the gravel road. They brought casseroles, cards, or homemade remedies for bee stings, but mostly they came to see Boone for themselves. Some leaned over the fence, murmuring in awe as the old horse stood quietly by Ginny's side, his body still marked but his eyes brightening day by day. Others lingered on the porch, eager for every detail of the story. "That horse has more lives than a cat," old Mr. Jenkins said, peering over his glasses. "Never seen anything like it." Ginny offered polite thanks, exhaustion pressing at the edges of her patience. She smiled for the well-wishers, but couldn't shake the feeling that their admiration was tinged with suspicion. The ranch, once a refuge, felt exposed. Not all the attention was friendly. A few neighbors, people who had never set foot on the property before, approached Ginny with folded arms and skeptical frowns. "You sure it's safe letting animals loose after something like that?" Mrs. Howard asked, eyeing the paddocks. "Those bees could come back. Maybe it's a sign. Something ain't right out here." Ginny kept her voice calm. "I check the fields every morning, and I'm talking with the vet about prevention, but these things happen in nature. We do the best we can." Mrs. Howard wasn't convinced. "I just hope you're not tempting fate, Virginia. Some things can't be fixed with good intentions." Word soon reached the local animal control office, and 2 officers in pressed uniforms arrived one bright afternoon. Their white SUV stood out like a ghost against the red dirt driveway. Ginny's heart thumped as she greeted them at the gate, Boone grazing quietly behind her. The officers introduced themselves, Ms. Rivera, sharp-eyed and businesslike, and Mr. Grady, whose expression hovered between concern and boredom. "We received some reports about the incident," Rivera began, clipboard in hand. "We're here to make sure everything is safe for your animals and for the community." Ginny stood tall. "Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions and show you around." They walked the ranch, examining fences, feed bins, and water troughs, noting every detail. Rivera inspected Boone, asking about the timeline, the vet's care, the emergency steps taken. Ginny answered each question, her hands clenched behind her, anxiety twisting in her gut.
Grady paused by the barn, jotting something on his notepad. "A swarm like that isn't normal," he said. "Not quite accusing, but close. Any idea what triggered it?" Ginny shook her head. "No, sir. We haven't had problems like this before. We think maybe an old hive was disturbed by the storm. I'm working with Dr. Byers to clear any threats." Rivera's gaze was cool, but not unkind. "Some neighbors mentioned past incidents. We need to be sure your rescue work isn't putting anyone at risk. You have a lot of animals on this land." The words stung. Ginny felt a flush creep up her neck. "These animals have nowhere else to go. I follow all regulations. I care for them the best I can." Rivera softened, but Grady pressed. "You could be fined if we find negligence. You might have to reduce your numbers or make safety changes." Ginny swallowed, fear gripping her. She glanced at Boone, who watched quietly, his head over the gate. "I understand. Please do what you need." The inspection took most of the afternoon. Ruth, watching from the porch, offered the officers iced tea and a wary eye. Clara stayed close to Ginny, her steady presence a comfort as the officers walked the property and took photographs. By sunset, Rivera handed Ginny a business card. "We'll file a report. You'll hear from us soon. In the meantime, keep documentation of everything you do for your animals. Any more incidents, call us immediately." Ginny nodded, feeling both relief and dread as the officers drove away. That evening, the ranch felt heavy with uncertainty. Ginny sat on the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea. Clara joined her, folding herself into a wicker chair. "Don't let them scare you, Ginny. You're doing good work here. Anyone with sense can see it." Ginny let out a shaky breath. "If they take Boone, or find me, or shut down the rescue, I don't know what I'll do. He's family. All of them are." Clara reached over, squeezing Ginny's hand. "You're not alone. The people who matter know the truth. You fought for Boone. We all saw it." Inside, Ruth was on the phone, her voice clipped and fierce as she rallied support from church friends and longtime neighbors. Ginny caught fragments. "No, she's not reckless. Yes, they're safe. Those animals are loved." The calls continued late into the night, but the unease lingered. As darkness fell, Ginny checked the barn one last time. Boone stood close, his body warm against the chill. Ginny pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes. "We're not giving up," she whispered into his mane. "Not tonight, not ever." Outside, a breeze swept through the grass, carrying both the gossip and the hope of the community. Ginny stood tall, knowing she had weathered one storm, but more might be coming. The fight was far from over, but for now the ranch still stood, a beacon for anyone willing to believe in second chances. The uneasy calm that had settled over Ginny's ranch didn't last long. Spring in Tennessee had always been unpredictable. One day gentle and warm, the next wild and full of threats. Ginny watched the sky for trouble, out of habit, never trusting a blue morning to stay friendly by afternoon. It was a Sunday when the air felt too heavy, the sky turning from blue to bruised purple as the day wore on. Ginny was in the barn, brushing Boone's coat and humming to herself, feeling grateful for the small steps he was making every day. Boone, still thin and stiff, leaned into her touch, sighing with what sounded almost like relief. Ginny's hands moved automatically, her mind only half present, lulled by the repetitive motion and the quiet clatter of horses shifting in their stalls. She didn't notice the wind at first, just a whisper through the trees. But then the light changed and a chill swept over the yard. Ginny looked up as the first rumble of thunder rolled in from the west, low and ominous. She set the brush aside and moved quickly, checking latches, making sure the feed room was closed, scanning the fields for any strays. Her heart beat faster, a learned rhythm, the echo of years on the land. Then the rain came. Not a gentle shower, but a wall of water that hammered the roof, filling gutters, turning the yard to slick, sucking mud in minutes. Lightning flickered above the hills, and the wind picked up, bending the old pecan trees nearly double. A shout rang out, Clara running across the yard with her coat over her head. "Ginny, the creek's rising, fast!" Her voice barely carried above the roar. Ginny bolted from the barn, her boots sliding on the slick grass as she reached the fence line. Beyond the paddocks, the little creek that wound through the pasture had swollen with frightening speed. Water spilled over its banks, rushing toward the low-lying barns. Ginny's mind raced. She'd seen this before, but not with the animals in such fragile condition, and never with Boone still so weak. "We have to get them out," she shouted, already moving toward the paddocks.
The rain blurred everything. Ginny called for her mother, who appeared at the porch, eyes wide. "Stay inside, Mama. I'll handle it." Ruth nodded, clutching her rosary, fear in every line of her face. Clara and Ginny sprinted to the back barn, flinging open the doors as water lapped at their ankles. The horses inside were frantic, their eyes rolling, hooves striking the wooden walls. Ginny's hands shook as she fumbled with halters and lead ropes, her voice low and steady. "Easy, easy now. Come on, babies." Thunder shook the barn as they led the first two rescues out into the rain. Mud sucked at Ginny's boots, and her arms strained to keep the panicked horses from bolting. Clara wrangled the next two, shouting instructions over the storm. They worked quickly, adrenaline lending strength to their tired muscles. Then Ginny heard it, a sharp, terrified whinny from the far stall. Marigold, a new rescue, pawed frantically at the floor, eyes wild with terror. Water was pouring through a crack in the wall, pooling around her hooves. Ginny's heart stuttered. "Clara, I need you." Together they forced the stall open. Marigold surged forward, nearly knocking Ginny off her feet. She tried to get the rope around Marigold's neck, but the mare reared, slipping in the mud. For a moment, chaos reigned. Horses milling in the yard, water rising by the minute, the air thick with fear and rain. Ginny struggled to hang on, but Marigold broke free, bolting toward the fence, straight for the deepening floodwater. "No!" Ginny cried, running after her, slipping, falling, struggling to her feet. The world narrowed to the frantic shapes in the storm, the sharp smell of sweat and mud.
Then, through the rain, a blur of chestnut. Boone. Ginny stared, disbelief and hope warring in her chest. Boone, still frail, moved with a stubborn determination she hadn't seen since before the attack. He stepped into Marigold's path, blocking her way, ears forward, body tense but unyielding. For a moment, Marigold paused, staring at Boone. Something passed between them, silent, urgent. Boone nickered, soft but insistent. Marigold snorted, her body trembling, but she turned. Just a few steps, enough for Ginny and Clara to reach her. Together, they managed to get both horses safely away from the rushing water, hearts pounding, breath ragged. The storm raged on. Ginny, Clara, and now a handful of neighbors, drawn by the chaos and the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, worked together, moving animals, hauling supplies, and stacking hay to keep it dry. The community that had been divided by gossip and fear now pulled together by necessity. Someone brought sandbags, another neighbor arrived with a flatbed truck to ferry animals to higher ground. Clara organized the efforts, her calm voice cutting through the panic. "You, help Ginny with the foals. You two, get those tarps over the feed." In the middle of the mess, Boone stood guard over the herd, his legs shaking but his eyes fierce. He nudged the youngest rescue, guiding her toward safety. Ginny watched, tears mixing with rain on her face, awe swelling in her chest. They worked through the night. By dawn, the water had started to recede, the barn still standing, every animal accounted for. Ginny slumped against the fence, her body spent but her spirit burning with a strange, grateful fire. Clara pressed a muddy hand to Ginny's shoulder. "We did it. You did it. And Boone, he's a miracle." Ginny turned to look at Boone, standing in the morning light, battered but unbowed. She knew then that whatever storms still waited for them, they'd face them together, stronger than before, and surrounded by a community no longer strangers, but friends bound by trial and hope. The morning after the flood felt like the world had been turned inside out and then set upright again, if only barely. Sunlight shimmered in puddles that dotted the yard, the fields soggy but golden under a wide, forgiving sky. Ginny's boots squelched as she walked the perimeter fence, her every step a reminder of the chaos and courage that had kept her animals and herself alive through the night. Word of the flood traveled quickly, as news always did in their little Tennessee town. But this time, it wasn't the whispers of doubt that came first. It was stories of neighbors working shoulder to shoulder, sandbags passed hand to hand, Boone's unlikely heroics as he helped herd the last terrified filly to safety. Photos and shaky phone videos started popping up online, the battered ranch bathed in sunrise, muddy but still standing, Boone's chestnut coat unmistakable among the huddled animals. For once, hope seemed to travel even faster than fear.
Ginny hadn't slept more than an hour when she saw the familiar white SUV pulling up the drive. Animal control, back for their follow-up. Ginny's stomach tightened. Last time, their visit had left her with a thick knot of anxiety that no amount of reassurance could fully untangle. This time, she squared her shoulders and walked out to meet them. Miss Rivera stepped out of the SUV, clipboard in hand, but her posture wasn't as rigid as before. Mr. Grady followed, still serious but less guarded, casting an appraising glance around the yard. The air held a different charge, and Ginny could feel it. There was respect, curiosity, something closer to openness. "We heard about the flood," Rivera said, surveying the scene. "Your neighbors said you kept all the animals safe. That's no small feat in a storm like that." Ginny nodded, letting herself hope just a little. "We did what we had to. I had help, from the community, from Clara, and, honestly, from Boone. He saved one of the rescues." Grady raised his eyebrows. "That's the one—" He pointed at Boone, who stood with his head high, watching the visitors with calm, intelligent eyes. Ginny managed a weary smile. "That's him, still standing." Rivera walked the fence line, checking the repairs, the sandbags, the places where neighbors were hammering up new boards or moving wheelbarrows of debris. She took notes, but her questions were less pointed, more curious. How long have you been running the rescue? What's your intake process? How do you handle emergencies? Ginny answered honestly, her nerves fading as she spoke. This was her life, and in that moment, she was proud of it. Inside the barn, Ruth offered the officers sweet tea and biscuits. Clara gave a brief, efficient rundown of last night's evacuation, how everyone pitched in, how Boone led the way, how Ginny hadn't left a single animal behind. After nearly an hour of questions and observation, Rivera closed her notebook. She looked Ginny in the eye, her expression thoughtful. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Most places would have lost at least a few animals last night. We've seen it before, and it's never easy." She paused, her gaze softening. "But you didn't lose anyone. The animals are calm, healthy, and clearly cared for. The community support is obvious. That matters in our report." Grady nodded, for the first time letting a small smile slip. "You've got something special here, Miss Walsh. That horse, Boone, right? He's got more heart than most people I know." Ginny felt her shoulders drop, some invisible burden sliding off. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight with relief. Rivera handed her a copy of the new report, this one with words like commendable emergency response, exemplary animal care, and community partnership. No fines, no threats. Instead, the promise of a follow-up visit, not to investigate, but to learn from Ginny's approach and share it with others. As the officers left, Ginny caught sight of two local reporters pulling up to the ranch, cameras and microphones in hand. Word of Boone's bravery had reached the local news, and suddenly Ginny found herself telling the story on camera. How the horse that nearly died had saved another, how neighbors came together, how a ranch that was nearly lost was saved by teamwork and faith. The interviews aired that night on the local news. Donations began arriving almost immediately. Small envelopes of cash tucked under the gate, bags of feed left at the front porch, emails offering support, volunteers, supplies. A few days later, Ginny received a call from the county fair committee. Would she come and share her story on stage? Would Boone come too? The news felt unreal, but the excitement in Ruth's voice was unmistakable. "You go, Virginia. Let them see what you've done, what all of us have done." Ginny spent the next few days organizing the ranch, making sure every animal was safe and cared for, preparing for the county fair speech. Clara helped gather photos and videos, Ruth baked a mountain of biscuits for the volunteers, and the rescued horses seemed to sense the lightness in the air, their movements less wary, their eyes brighter. On the day of the fair, Ginny loaded Boone into the trailer, nerves prickling as she drove the winding road into town. The fairgrounds were alive with the sound of children, music, the smell of popcorn and hay. When Boone stepped into the ring, the crowd fell silent, then erupted in cheers and applause. Ginny stood at the microphone, her hands shaking, not with fear, but with the weight of gratitude. She spoke about the night of the swarm, the longest night of her life, the flood, the courage of a wounded horse, and the people who wouldn't let her fail. "We're not special," she said. "We're just proof that when you refuse to give up, when you lean on your friends and believe in the impossible, miracles can happen, even in the middle of a storm."
As she finished, she saw her mother's eyes shining in the crowd, Clara's proud smile, and Boone standing tall at her side, the living symbol of everything they'd fought for. In that moment, Ginny knew the tide had finally turned. They had survived, and they were no longer alone. By the time autumn arrived, a gentle hush seemed to settle over the hills and fields. Gold and crimson leaves spun down from the trees, catching in Boone's mane as he grazed in the pasture, his steps slow but sure. The worst of the storms, bees, floods, and fear had passed, leaving something stronger in their wake. The ranch had become more than a place of refuge. It was now a symbol of hope, a living story that seemed to reach every corner of the county. After the county fair, word spread further.
Ginny's phone rang nearly every day, calls from strangers, animal lovers, and parents who wanted their children to meet the miracle horse and the woman who had refused to give up on him. Some days, Ginny worried it was too much, that the attention would fade and the old loneliness would creep back in. But each visit brought something unexpected. Laughter, stories, connections that made the world feel a little less lonely and a lot more kind. Children visited the ranch in groups, their eyes wide with wonder as Ginny led them through the stables. Boone became the star of every tour, standing patiently as little hands brushed his coat or braided wildflowers into his tail. Ginny taught the kids how to approach a horse, how to move slow and gentle, how to listen and watch for signs of trust. She shared Boone's story, how he had nearly died, how he fought through pain and fear, how, in his own way, he had become a hero to the other rescues. The children's faces glowed with amazement, and many parents left inspired, wanting to help in whatever way they could. A few brought bags of feed or old blankets. Others offered to volunteer, mucking stalls, mending fences, or just keeping the animals company on quiet afternoons. One afternoon, a shy teenager named Abby stayed behind after the tour. She lingered near Boone's stall, running her fingers through his mane. Ginny watched from the doorway, recognizing the look in Abby's eyes, the blend of sadness, hope, and longing for connection. "You like horses?" Ginny asked, stepping softly into the stall. Abby nodded, not meeting her eyes. "My dad used to take me riding, before things got hard." Her voice trailed off, the pain fresh but unspoken. Ginny sat down on the straw beside her. "Horses understand more than we give them credit for," she said quietly. "They know what it means to hurt, and they know how to keep going, just like people do." Abby looked up, her eyes glistening. "Do you think I could help here, sometimes?" Ginny smiled, her heart swelling with a new sense of purpose. "I'd like that very much, Abby. Boone would too." As the weeks passed, Abby became a fixture at the ranch, arriving after school to help feed the horses, groom their coats, and talk quietly with Ginny. She opened up little by little, sharing stories of her father, her struggles at school, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Ginny listened, encouraged, and watched Abby grow more confident with each passing day. Boone, for his part, seemed to thrive on the attention. His coat grew sleek again, and his steps lost their limp. He nickered and greeting every morning, sometimes following Ginny across the fields or standing guard at the gate as if he understood that his presence alone brought hope. Ruth, watching all of this unfold, found her own heart changing. She had always loved her daughter, but the hardships of life had made her cautious, sometimes distant. Now, seeing the respect Ginny had earned, the gratitude of strangers, and the new sense of community growing around the ranch, Ruth felt something in herself soften. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world in amber light, Ruth joined Ginny on the porch. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of children laughing, horses snorting, and the distant hum of cicadas filled the air. "I never told you this," Ruth began quietly. "But there were times I was afraid you were carrying too much, that you'd break under it all. But you didn't. You made this place something beautiful. I'm proud of you, Virginia, more than you'll ever know." Ginny felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't look away. Instead, she took her mother's hand, holding it gently. "Thank you, Mama. I couldn't have done any of it without you." Their words lingered in the golden dusk, binding old wounds and lighting new paths.
As autumn deepened, Ginny found herself in a new role, mentor, not just to Abby, but to others who reached out for help or advice. She spoke at schools and local clubs, sharing the lessons Boone had taught her, the importance of patience, persistence, and faith in the face of loss. She started a small after-school program for kids who struggled, using the ranch as a classroom for learning about animals, responsibility, and kindness. The ranch itself flourished. Volunteers kept coming, donations arrived like small miracles, and the horses, once abandoned, frightened, or broken, grew strong and content. There were still hard days, still moments when Ginny doubted herself or mourned an old loss,
but the burden no longer felt so heavy. Boone became a legend, but Ginny knew the real miracle wasn't just in his survival. It was in the community that had come together, the lives changed, and the love that had grown stronger in the face of adversity. One evening, as Ginny walked the fields with Boone at her side, she looked back at the house. Her mother's silhouette in the window, Abby laughing with Clara by the barn, children waving as they left for home. The ranch glowed in the twilight, full of promise. Ginny pressed her hand to Boone's neck. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We really did." And as the stars blinked on overhead, it was clear that the story of healing, of miracles and hope was still being written, one quiet day at a time. As autumn edged closer to winter, the days at the ranch settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm. The fields faded from green to amber, horses' coats thickened against the chill, and the first wisps of frost laced the morning grass. But inside Ginny's heart, and in the hearts of everyone who touched the ranch, something was forever changed. With Boone's recovery now the talk of the county, Ginny found herself called to share their story far beyond the ranch gate. Local schools invited her to speak at assemblies, and churches asked her to sit for coffee after Sunday service. She accepted each invitation with a shy, steady pride, determined to pay forward the hope she'd received. Her favorite stop was always the middle school, where the gym filled with restless students, their faces at first skeptical, then slowly rapt as Ginny talked about the long night of the swarm. She never shied from the hard parts, the fear, the exhaustion, the moments when she almost lost hope. But she always ended with what mattered most. Miracles, Ginny told the students, don't come from nowhere. They come from not giving up when you want to. They come from letting people help you, even when you're scared. And they come from loving something or someone enough to fight for them, even if it costs you. She brought Boone to some of these talks when she could. The old horse stood patient in the school parking lot, nuzzling pockets for treats, letting dozens of nervous hands stroke his nose. Teachers marveled at his gentleness. Students left sticky notes and crayon drawings pinned to the barn door. But it wasn't just the children who listened. The adults, neighbors, other ranchers, the animal control officers took her words to heart. At a town hall meeting, Ginny spoke about teamwork, sharing the story of the flood and how their little community had come together, setting aside old grudges and suspicions to save something bigger than themselves. That night, Ginny said, her voice clear in the echoing hall, nobody cared who'd been right or wrong about how to keep horses, or who'd said what about my rescue work. All that mattered was getting the job done, together. Sometimes it takes a disaster to remind us we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. Inspired by her story, the community voted to form a new emergency team. Neighbors who would check on one another, lend supplies, or rescue stranded animals. Ginny helped organize the first meeting, setting out a big pot of Ruth's famous chili and watching with quiet pride as old rivals laughed over dinner, swapping tips and stories. At the ranch, safety protocols changed too. Clara suggested an emergency supply closet. First aid kits, extra halters, laminated maps showing every pasture and fence. Abby and the other young volunteers helped hang evacuation instructions in every barn, their neat handwriting a sign of how much the place meant to them. The greatest lesson Ginny learned and shared with everyone she could was humility. Nature doesn't care about our plans, she'd say, looking out at the fields, but that doesn't mean we stop planning. We just do it with open eyes and open hearts. We stay humble because nature will always have the last word. For Ginny, the wounds left by the bees and the flood were still real. Sometimes her arms tingled when she remembered that frantic night, and Boone would flinch at a certain buzz in the summer air. But their scars became part of the story, proof of what they'd overcome. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful night, Ginny was invited to speak at the fair's main stage. She stood in the golden light, her hair streaked with silver now, but her eyes as clear and determined as ever. Boone stood beside her, leaning against her shoulder, the pair of them framed by cheers and applause. Ginny spoke simply, from the heart. "A miracle," she said, "isn't always a lightning bolt or a stroke of luck. Sometimes it's just what's left after you refuse to quit. It's the friends who show up in a storm, the hands that reach out, the moments you choose hope over fear. Every fence mended, every foal born, every quiet evening, these are miracles too." She paused, looking down at Boone, remembering every moment of terror and hope, every long night that had brought them here. "What I've learned, what Boone has taught me, is that survival isn't just about getting through. It's about finding meaning in the struggle and then using what you've learned to help others." After the speech, Ginny wandered the fairgrounds, greeted by faces young and old. Some asked her for advice about animals, about life, about holding on when storms come. She answered as best she could, always coming back to the same truth. None of us do this alone. That night, as the last of the fair lights faded and the stars glimmered overhead, Ginny returned home, Boone's lead rope in her hand. They paused by the old barn, where the story had begun, the air thick with memory. Boone nuzzled her gently, his breath warm against her cheek. Ginny closed her eyes, letting herself feel the fullness of the moment, the quiet gratitude, the love, the peace that had grown from hardship. She knew there would be more storms, more trials. Life never promised otherwise. But she also knew she would never face them as she once had, alone, afraid, or uncertain. Because now Ginny understood that every act of courage, every hard choice, every hand offered in kindness, stitched together the true miracle of survival, community, hope, and an enduring bond that not even time could break. As she led Boone to his stall, Ginny looked up at the moon rising above the hills. She smiled, whispering into the cool night, "Thank you for the miracle in the storm, for every new day." And with that, the ranch, the horses, and the people who called it home carried on, grateful, stronger, and always, always ready for whatever tomorrow might bring.